The one thing that you cannot deny about Monster Hunter Rise is that it is the most experimental game in the whole series. There are more mechanics and gimmicks in Rise and its DLC than there are people who have bought the Wii U for Tri-Ultimate. To simply say that this installment was a small exploratory project for Capcom would be like saying I'm casually strolling through the ancient forest to find a monster I'm trying to hunt. It's gonna be more complicated than that. Wire bugs, wyvern riding, switch skills, skill swaps. Christ, there is an entire catalogue of gimmicks that's been introduced in one game that it makes Generations Ultimate feel like Tri when comparing content. So as we arrive to the final months of Sunbreak, and pretty much 5th gen Monster Hunter, there is going to be a lot of debating and talking as to which of these gimmicks should come back in Monster Hunter 6. And in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest features of Rise, and the possibility, or impossibility, of it coming back. So here we go. Should the Palamutes make their return in 6th gen Monster Hunter? Since the introduction to Feline Comrades all the way back in 2nd gen, the concept of having a companion tag along with the hunter has become such a fundamental staple to a Monster Hunter game that not having an animal friend come along in your little adventures feels like violating some sort of unwritten rule in playing this series. This gimmick has only refined ever since through the generations. Freedom Unite gave them skills, Tri got a bit indie, and the whole concept gave us little dancing legends. And later 4th gen brought in more depth, customization, and skills to make it at least feel like we're playing with another player, just without the danger of someone fainting and failing the quest. So leading into Monster Hunter Rise, the developers felt that a new flavor had to be thrown in the concept to freshen things up. And what we got was the Palamutes. Ever since the loading screens between area zones went away, and rightfully so, it became more of an incentive to go out and explore these more open and expansive maps. And because these newer maps are bigger than before, hunters are gonna want to traverse these locales as fast and as efficiently as possible. World had the right idea in implementing more camps around the maps so that players can fast travel through different points of the location. Unfortunately, the laborious struggle of having to move yourself in these maps still remains. So, the devs improved the traveling meta even further with the release of Rise by giving us literal biological motorcycles, which is genuinely the only way I could describe these Palamutes. Of course, the Palamutes do offer more purpose and uses other than traveling around the map, but I am so sorry, I pretty much only use these dogs for travel. In fact, most of the time that I do hunt with these Palamutes, I barely even know what they're doing during the hunt, for I do understand that they are more useful than just moving around. You can customize and create builds for them just like with your Palicos, you can add different skills and abilities toward your Palamutes as you play through the game, and most importantly, you can utilize these puppers in quite smart ways during a hunt. My favorite has always been hopping onto them when I'm low on sharpness and avoid attacks while I'm sharpening my weapon. So all in all, these companions offer as much utility and functionality as the Palicos, which is especially impressive given that they are still considered new to the series. To me, Rise will always be an installment of the series where mobility and speed is its main theme, and the Palamutes fit in quite nicely with other gimmicks like the wire bugs, the wall running, and the wyvern riding. Now, let's go ahead and respond to the question for this topic and see if Palamutes should make their return in Monster Hunter 6. As mentioned, Rise and Sunbreak stands out in the franchise as being the games where it's all about speed and mobility. The design of these games will always be about how fast hunters can move about in both combat and exploration, and because Palamutes' very design is maneuverability, then it could all depend if Monster Hunter 6 will continue the theme of the mobility of Rise. Of course, we don't know what or how Monster Hunter 6 will look like. Pretty much all Monster Hunter games are unique in some fashion, so we can't really quite predict what Monster Hunter 6 will be. Monster Hunter World, and if you want to go back even further, Generations Ultimate, were very grounded and slower in comparison to Rise. So the idea of a mount for the hunter back then wasn't really considered. However, if we're going to be optimistic about this, it will all depend on if Monster Hunter 6 will be more expansive and more vast in its locations. If the devs are going to stick with World's big maps, mixed in with Rise's more horizontal and flatter maps, then that could be a possible reason for the Palamutes to come back. And to be even more optimistic, there really is no reason for the devs to not make these new locations be bigger and more expansive. 5th generation Monster Hunter was such a gigantic leap both technically and graphically for the series, that not making more bigger and detailed locations for future games will make the series feel stagnant and not advancing enough. If the Palicos of old only got better as they function as companions for the hunter, and as locations get more extensive in newer titles, then I don't see why not that Palamutes could become a series regular because of this. Additionally, it would also give the devs more incentive and motivation to create bigger maps and make these locales be that living, breathing environment that those old cutscenes portray in previous games. Plus, have you ever done that thing in GTA 5 where you just ride around San Andreas when you're bored while listening to whatever radio station is on? I always imagine how it would be like doing this in a Monster Hunter game, just running around the wilderness and just soaking in the ecosystem that you're in. It's just one of those small little things that I, and some people do when we're not playing the game seriously. Additionally, racing around the map can still be a thing. Do not tell me you've played Monster Hunter Rise and not raced around the map with other randoms. It's just something that you had to do. Furthermore, bringing back Palamutes can bring the prospect in them being improved upon, more useful tools and abilities in the same manner as the Palico gadgets and world, and hopefully more appearance types to choose when you're customizing your own Palamutes. Different breeds to choose from like a Rottweiler or a Saint Bernard. I do know that there are a lot of dog lovers in the Monster Hunter community, so the idea in itself is going to be a major appeal to them. And it's even more appealing for dog owners as well, who want to make their own pets in the game, like with the cat owners in the community. And one major reason as to why these dogs should come back is for the purpose for more optional buddies for players to use in their hunts. Now, I do know that some people don't particularly care for these Palamutes to come back, and I'm gonna get back to that point, but I firmly believe that having more options for the hunters leads to a better playing experience. You don't have to use these Palamutes in Rise, as they are completely optional, but it's always handy to give players more choices to bring in their hunts and give them a bigger variety of tools to use when playing the game. Likewise, you can also freshen up playthroughs as well. For example, if you go through a long period of time hunting with a Palico, and if you get bored, you will always have that option to switch things up and use your doggy mount friend for the next playthrough. Right, onto the factors that would probably deny these poor doggos from coming back in newer games. As mentioned earlier, other people in the community don't really see the appeal to these new companions. Now, I always try to see these things through both sides, so I can understand why. For one, being a fairly new gimmick does come with some hiccups. For example, the amount of times where I press the A for my dog to come pick me up when I'm trying to get away from a monster, and the little shit still hasn't heard me whistle, and I'm just running around in circles while a giant dinosaur is trying to obliterate me, is quite frankly infuriating. Additionally, that problem doesn't stop there. It also happens with the radial menu. Because I'm sick and tired of mashing my thumbs down on my A button, I had to add the call button on my radial menu, and the furry bastard still doesn't hear me whistle half the time. You have to be in the right radius for that mutt to hear you, and if I'm gonna be honest, I really don't have the time to visually locate my dog while I'm trying to not get skewered by a risen Valstrax. Therefore, the feeling of clunkiness when using these dogs are present, and also, why can these things scale through vines at a 90-degree angle, yet these things can barely hold onto a wall that I'm trying to climb? What is going on here? The other factor as to why Palamutes should not return is that they take away the tension and danger when fighting monsters. How so? Well, remember when I said that I like to hop onto my K9 when I want to sharpen my weapon? That little trick became a genuine strategy to avoid getting hit as well as getting away from unwanted attention. You know how being able to move around when you heal back in World became a thing of debate in 2018? What the Palamute did to that would be like if the longsword became even more overpowered and casualized after Rise. The spirit of loading screens still exists today. Whenever you're in hot shit back in the older games, you can escape by going through another zone. Well, the modern equivalent to that would be to jump onto your dog and hightail out of there, while healing yourself and sharpening yourself, and if you have the spare time, buff yourself with endemic life and your other items. Like, do you see the problem here? A lot of the veterans of the community like to trash and make fun of these newer games because of how casualized and how easy they are. Well, with examples like that, can you really blame them? The Palamutes were one of the major examples for why some people, especially jaded Monster Hunter fans, were convinced that the franchise started to become more hand-holdy and dumbed down. So leaving these dogs out in the next game could be considered as some sort of return to form for hunters to be less safer and make the game more challenging. Together with all these examples, one last reason for why these rideable puppers should stay in Kimura for good is for the very same reason as to why they should come back: mobility. Right, I know, this is going to be a bit confusing to understand. Why would the very reason that these things should come back be the fact that they should not come back? Well, as stated before, we don't really know how Monster Hunter 6 will look like. We don't really know how it will function, and the design for Monster Hunter 6 is literally unknown. So there is a possibility that yes, we could have bigger and more expansive locations, but the need of using Palamutes could be made redundant, because there are a lot of alternatives that you could use to travel across maps before Rise and even in Rise. For example, the Raider rides from Iceborne could come back. The very first mechanic that gave the concept of the Palamutes could be an easier alternative with regards to development time. Additionally, you still have options to use like the Great Wire Bugs that scatter around the map to travel faster, and there's a chance for the devs to bring back the diverse designs of these maps, from long slopes that you can slide around to numerous layers in an area from which you can climb up or down. Hell, they can even bring back the Wing Drakes. Bloody hell, remember the Wing Drakes? Those things were completely wiped from my memory, and only through writing this script did I remember they exist. What I'm trying to say is that even though the Palamutes have become pretty much the go-to method to move around, they're not really the only options in that regard. It's only in Rise and Sunbreak that the idea of mounts has become prevalent, but before Rise, the series didn't really need mounts, or a method of transportation. Similarly, speaking of development time, not having these dogs return avoids the time in developing new armor, weapons, and abilities for Palamutes, and that in exchange will allow more time to develop newer mechanics and other things for the team to focus on. In conclusion, we have all thought about the different mechanics and gimmicks from past games making their return in future games, from popular ones like underwater combat to even older ones like in-game seasons. And when Sunbreak finally reaches its end, and a newer game will appear in the future, then this will happen to the mechanics that we became so used to from the past couple of years, and one of that being are the Palamutes. Now personally, I would like these dogs to come back in newer titles, though I really won't get entirely upset if they get the same treatment as Cha-Cha and Kayamba. However, let me know your own opinions. Do you want these guys to come back in the next game? Or do you want them to stay away? Leave your thoughts down below. Do leave a like if you enjoyed this video. And as always, I shall see you later.